society, journalism, and free speech that are sadly under threat these days. One striking way that this threat has expressed itself has been the attacks on social media practitioners. One tragic example that I learned about recently took place at the eastern end of the U.S.-Mexico border recently. A woman journalist in Nuevo Laredo worked with the newspaper Primera Hora. She also contributed to local social media outlets under the pseudonym La Nena. Those sites, those social networking sites, have been used in Nuevo Laredo to allow people to anonymously discuss the security situation, to report on ongoing gun battles, to report on criminal organization activities to the federal police and the military. Members of the newly formed state police found the decapitated body of La Nena in an upscale residential neighborhood in Nuevo Laredo last weekend. And a message was left alongside the body warning others against reporting on Zeta activities. This was the third murder of this kind in as many weeks. It just underscores the importance of all we can do and what the Institute and others can do to help journalists who are facing those kind of threats these days. As President Obama and Secretary Clinton have said, we know that as the nation and society that is the world's largest consumer of illegal narcotics, and as a nation from which many weapons illegally enter Mexico, we have a co-responsibility for supporting Mexico in stopping the sources of this kind of violence. And programs like the IOAs help us to meet that co-responsibility by working with Mexican journalists and NGOs and other members of Mexican civil society. Having just taken up my position as ambassador to Mexico less than 3 weeks ago, I'm busy getting accustomed to Mexico, and I'm making acquaintance with key officials and interlocutors there. But in many ways, it's still uniquely appropriate for me to make one of my very early public appearances here in San Diego at the Institute. This is a very important, populous border region where our two countries meet, where you can see so many daily examples of the interaction between the U.S. and Mexico. You can see that we have shared problems that require shared solutions. The people of California and Baja California are joined by ties of history, culture, language, family, and commerce. There's a tremendous economic interdependence between San Diego and Tijuana. The hopes for prosperity and their growth are intertwined. Security problems on one side of the fence have an inevitable effect on the other side. The San Isidro port of entry, as I've recently learned, but you no doubt know very well, it's the busiest land border crossing in the world. And there's, for me, astonishing 110,000 people coming into the U.S. each day to visit friends and family, to attend school, to work, or what I'm told is one of the very important reasons for coming across, to go shopping at the Plaza de las Americas. That would be maybe one of my reasons also for coming across. But we also know, as we were reminded a couple of weeks ago, that when there are problems at San Isidro, everyone is affected. It's a tremendously important link between these communities and these regions on both sides of the border. And this San Diego-Tijuana region demonstrates a lot about the broader relationship between Mexico and the United States, that it is based on much, much more than just security cooperation. I recently testified before Congress as I was being considered for this position, and I stressed in that testimony that this is a unique relationship in the enormity of the breadth and depth and in its direct impact on American security and prosperity. This is a complex relationship, but it is unique in how many millions of lives, of daily lives, are affected on both sides of the border. in the United States and in Mexico. The two economies and societies are indispensably interconnected. And it really gives both of us on both sides of the border, all of us, a shared responsibility to deal with the challenges that we're both facing. More than $1 billion in trade crosses the border each day, and almost 1 million people cross the border each day as part of their daily normal activities. Now, in tackling this set of issues, and I said when I was testifying before Congress, it's really pretty humbling to think about taking on all these issues and these responsibilities. As I thought about it, I said, I'm going to need a lot of help, a lot of input from my colleagues at the embassy, from my colleagues in Washington, from the governments of Mexico, and from civil society on both sides of the border, from business people, from academics, from those people who really understand all the different strands of the relationship. As Jeff said, I've had 36 years of experience a lot of places around the world, and I think I've learned a few things along the way that are important for the relationship. But it's going to demand a lot of learning and a lot of working together from a lot of you, from your guests at the Institute, from input of just how to think through these problems, because they're very big problems that we both face on both sides of the border, and they're not something that changes day to day. At present, we get a lot of attention, of course, in the headlines about security, about crime and law enforcement. They tend to dominate the news reporting. But I think as you all know, the common challenges that we face and what we need to work on together are much broader than that. President Obama gave an interview just yesterday, I think, that really touched on it. He talked a lot about education. He talked about growing the economies. He talked about the broader social challenges that we both face. And those are things that we need to work on together, we need to think through together. But it is true that over the past several years, we have at the center of some of our newest activities something called the Merida Initiative, which many of you know about very well. And we began that initiative by really looking at how can we combat and how can we weaken transnational criminal organizations. But as we started to look at that cluster of issues, we saw that it quickly really needed to touch on a broader range of issues. We needed to look at strengthening justice sector institutions, to reinvigorate border management, to reinforce Mexico's efforts to create strong and resilient communities in those areas that were affected by this border violence. And this was something that we thought through before I started working in Mexico, but it was Mexican and U.S. officials sitting down together thinking this through, and us taking the lead from our Mexican colleagues. How can we be supportive and how can we help you? And this program developed with the leadership and guidance of our colleagues from Mexico. As of late September, the U.S. Merida team has delivered a cumulative total of about $618 million in equipment, in technical assistance, and training since the initiative began in 2008. And our plans are to have delivered a cumulative total of about $900 million in that equipment and training and capacity building by the end of this year. One of the most important things that I have on my list of priority objectives is making sure that we do successfully accelerate the implementation of all of our Merida programs, and that we achieve the objectives that we laid out to support as effectively as possible our Mexican colleagues. Now, while we're making, from the United States side, an important contribution, it's really important to remember that it's the government of Mexico and the Mexican people that are bearing most of the burden, financially, political, and in terms of the human lives in this fight against transnational organized crime. Of the estimated 40,000 or so deaths attributed to narco violence since December of 2006. Nearly 2,000 of them have been members of Mexican security services. The Mexican budget for 2011 allocates over $10 billion for security. Now, it also does have impact for the United States, for U.S. government personnel serving in Mexico. We have had, sadly, victims of some of this narco-related violence. And one of the very top priorities for me is to assure the safety and security of our personnel serving in Mexico. But I'd also like to say that, as Jeff mentioned, I served for 6 years as Assistant Secretary for Economic and Business Affairs at the State Department. And one of the most gratifying things in coming again to focus on Mexico is to see how much our economic relationship has grown in importance. It really has been transformed over the past 2 decades. And now those ties are among the deepest that we have in the world with anybody, those economic ties. Trade has quadrupled to reach about $400 billion in 2010, making Mexico our second largest export market and our third largest trading partner. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce estimated recently that about 6 million U.S. jobs are supported by trade with Mexico. And well over 20 states have Mexico as the largest or second largest export destination for things that are produced in those states. And in fact, with Mexico and with Canada, we don't really trade with each other, we make things together. It's a kind of mutual integration that really helps the United States be more competitive in the world. And one of the things I really want to do, as Jeff indicated, is to work hard to support that mutual benefit and to strengthen those economic ties between our two countries. But what really makes the ties between Mexico and the United States extremely important are the people-to-people ties. 1 in 10 Americans are estimated to be of Mexican descent, and more than 1 million Americans call Mexico home. Tourism takes another 10 million North American citizens to Mexico each year. And there are just countless people-to-people exchanges that are going on all sorts of different levels between our two societies. This is a real source of strength, and I hope many of you will help me find new ways to build on those strengths, to help tie these societies together more closely, and to help us deal with some of the challenges that we face together. The future security and the well-being of the United States is rooted in a vibrant partnership with a stable, prosperous, and competitive Mexico that shares with us the values of democracy, of rule of law, of open markets, both at home and abroad. This partnership requires a whole-of-government approach on both sides of the border. We have to be good partners to each other. We have to build that spirit of good faith, of openness, of trust, of being able to be frank, and of working together to find solutions to problems, to discover new ways of moving forward together. It won't be easy all the time, but we need that really strong engagement, and we need to draw on all parts of our government and all parts of our society